Hello there. Um, there's a lot of speculation at the moment about what's going to happen next year about the economy. Some people are, convinced that everything's going to be okay. The markets will recover, inflation will be under control, blah blah. And a lot of people take the opposite view that it's going to be a complete and utter disaster. And I'm afraid I'm inclined to think it's going to be a disastrous year and maybe possibly a disastrous few years. And there's several reasons for this, which I'm going to go into. And some of what I'm going to mention, you'll find an article below from Zero Hedge in the description. There's a link there, which is worth taking a look at. And the basis for all this doom and gloom really is debt, the debt cycle. So what tends to happen in the past, if you look over a period of several hundred years, you'll see there's recessions. Periodic recessions is just what happens, in economies. You get a boom and a bust, is what they call it. And we had the last bust in 2008. And that's 14 years ago. So, I mean, these cycles tend to be 10 to 15 years. So we're kind of at the very end of a boom cycle. And one thing that was talked about before was bubbles, and here we are go again with another bubble. In fact, we've inflated debt bubble to world record levels. So the best way to sort of explain it in layman's terms, I think, is say, imagine you earn $50,000 or 50,000 euros or pounds a year. Okay, which is okay. That's a fairly decent amount of money to receive. I'd be happy enough with that. So, but then imagine you got a credit card with unlimited credit on it. Okay, so perhaps you put 1,000 or two on it the first year, and then you don't really pay it off. You just pay the minimum payments, and then 5 years later you've got 10,000, and whatever, going on, and eventually, imagine you just keep on piling and piling more and more debt on and paying just the minimum payments. Imagine you've now got to a point where you owe $2 million or £2 million. With that kind of level of debt, you'll never ever be able to pay it off. In fact, you'd be lucky if you could maintain the minimum payments at that rate. So that's essentially what's happened to a lot of countries around the world, where their debt as a proportion of their GDP is like over 90%, or in some cases, particularly bad would be Japan, Britain, America, and a few others, where it's well over 100% now. So what they're really doing is just servicing the debt and paying off the minimum payments of the interest, with no actual hope of ever reducing the actual debt. And this has just got worse and worse, and now it's at catastrophic levels, with America being the most in debt it's ever been. And this is relatively recent, I suppose, in the terms of a country's history. It's the last 50 years that America's got itself in a mess. And China has got itself in a bit of a mess, mostly because of the housing bubble. And in the last 10 or 15 years, Britain has got itself really in a terrible mess too. You've got half of Europe in terrible financial debt problems. Now, this is bad enough in itself, but I mean, if you're paying interest of 2% on this enormous figure, on say the theoretical 2 million you've got on the credit card with your salary of 50,000, you might just manage to cope if the interest is only 2%. But what happens when you get inflation? When you get inflation, that means the cost of your debt is going to go up. So the monthly payments are going to skyrocket, which is exactly what's happening now, because inflation across the world is going through the roof. And it's absolutely killing countries. It's destroying economies. You're starting to see huge numbers of job losses. The housing markets are beginning to go down the toilet. And, it's obvious where this is going. This is going to lead to national bankruptcies, more than likely, where countries will have no choice but to default because their debt is so enormous. If you've got interest rates of 7, 8, 9, 10%. Inflation's supposedly running around 10, 11%, and that's very conservative estimates. If interest rates go up into double figures, it will bankrupt countries. They will default, and that's it, which will lead to dire economic outcomes. So, it's not rocket science. People are talking things up and going, oh, the stock market is still up and blah, blah, and it does recover these rallies from time to time, and then it crashes again. But the overall sentiment, the overall reality of an economic outlook will eventually percolate through to things like the stock market, which will inevitably cause absolute catastrophic crashes. So, if you don't have a lot of debt, if you don't have your money in the stock market, you probably might be able to live okay. And if you look at things from a more spiritual perspective, instead of being completely consumed with finances and money and the value of things, maybe it's not such a big problem. Of course, if you're in desperate straits and you're poor and you can't afford to feed yourself, then you're going to be a priority. You won't really worry about spiritual aspects of things when you're starving to death, So unfortunately, a lot of people will be in bad position. But if you are able to do something to take control of the situation and help your life, get rid of your debts, get out of risky investments if you've got any savings, etc. If you're able to do something to put yourself in a strong financial position, maybe change job if you're in a risky area, which is very likely to be hit by redundancies. So moderate your spending. The most important thing obviously being to pay off your debts if you possibly can. If you can accept that there might be a cut in your standard of living, that things are going to be tough for a few years, and so mentally and spiritually prepare yourself for the the bust, the crash that's coming. It'll be a lot easier to deal with it than if it's just kind of blindsides you and you're caught unawares and you're like, oh my God, I wasn't expecting this. Oh, my life's ruined. I've lost all my money. Everything's screwed. If you're aware of what's coming down the road, you can prepare for it. And I think there's a lot of people who want to talk this up and say, oh no, it'll all be okay, because obviously, if the sentiment is really bad, it will just probably speed up the collapse, which is inevitable anyway. It's going to come one way or another. But if the more people that actually acknowledge it, that kind of accelerates it. So, you'd be as well to ignore these people because they're just trying to delay what is inevitable. When you've got a level of debt that's so catastrophic, all you can do is keep on printing and printing and printing, which will lead to hyperinflation, or you have to accept just that the crash is going to happen. There'll be a kind of great sort of, I don't want to use the word reset, but there'll be an equalization. There'll be an evening out of all these ridiculous irregularities, and that generally leads to bankruptcies. But ultimately, if there's hyperinflation, that's going to lead to bankruptcies and unemployment too. So it's kind of a no-win situation. It's probably better to take the hit than trying to delay even more, because in the end it'll end up like the Weimar Republic or Venezuela, where you need like 10 million bolivars to buy a loaf of bread, or you needed like 3 barrels full of Deutschmarks, just to buy you know, a penny chew or a little sweet. You know, that's how things got. They got that bad. But of course, nobody's really alive who remembers that, because that was so long ago. But people do actually remember what happened in Venezuela, because it's, well, it still sort of hasn't quite resolved itself. But you know, at its peak, you know, they just added extra zeros on the end of their currency because it was so worthless. So, but we're in a weird situation now where this could be happening in many countries at once, not just in Venezuela. It could happen to America, to Britain, to Greece, Italy, Japan, etc., China, all at the same time, which would make it all that much worse. So, I'm not saying all this to piss people off or depress people. I'm trying to warn people that, you know, you need to be prepared for what's coming down the line. And I'd suggest go check it out for yourself. Look at the financial information, and if you actually look at how much debt commercial companies have, how much debt individual nations have, it's pretty obvious it's unsustainable, that it has to come to an end eventually. And I think we've reached that kind of reckoning point now in 2023. I think they can't really paper over the cracks anymore, and you know, it's all going to come crashing down like some kind of house of cards that's hit by a gust of wind. So anyway, do your best to be prepared for what's coming, and check out that link in the description if you're interested to find out more about reasons why it's all going to go pop. And thanks for listening. Hope you found that useful and interesting, and if you did, give it a like please, and feel free to subscribe to my channel. Thanks a million. Bye bye.